In philosophy, the problem of moral responsibility has often been tackled from the basis of metaphysical conceptions of human agency and free will. In this video, I present the two main contending theories of free will, those being libertarianism and hard determinism, and show how they can lead to specific notions of moral responsibility: fatalism on the side of determinism and voluntarism on the side of libertarianism. I also challenge both accounts of moral responsibility, paying special attention to their corresponding propositions on the free will debate. I then advance a different notion of moral responsibility which, rooted in a determinism that accepts some level of uncertainty and relies more on probabilistic models, sees the practice of attaching moral evaluations to human actions as an evolutionary method developed to construct relationships amongst each other in the first place and make them more sophisticated through time. According to this view, humans use moral evaluations to build communities to survive, reproduce, and satisfy their necessities as social animals. Therefore, even if we accept some form of determinism, we can still defend the notion that humans are morally responsible for their actions in order to encourage or discourage them accordingly, since these have real consequences that can improve or jeopardize our communities. A potential criticism to this position and its corresponding reply are also included. Free will is the conception of humans as having the ability to act freely according to some self-directing will. Libertarianism jumps into the picture by accepting this premise to make the argument that, in virtue of having free will, we are the ultimate determinants of our actions, and whatever thing we do, we could have in fact done otherwise. If this conclusion is to be accepted, it would not be hard to imagine how a libertarian is drawn to accept the idea that humans voluntarily choose their doings and should therefore be held accountable for them. This is what is referred to as voluntarism. Praise is then given to those who act according to our moral values, and condemnation is voiced against those who violate them. However, voluntarists come into trouble right from the get-go when defending their metaphysical stance on free will. This is owed to the fact that, as advances in the natural and social sciences suggest, we do not have such capacity to act freely. Our actions are rather determined by a set of factors including our environment, beliefs, desires, etc., all of which are themselves the product of countless other factors that are often beyond our reach, thereby making them candidates for a potential deterministic explanation. Our actions are not the cause of some private, unconstrained will, but of a complex structure of causes and effects. Moral responsibility cannot then be placed on any single individual. Voluntarism is thereby ruled out as its main premise fails to describe the reality of human behavior. In response, a voluntarist might adopt a notion of free will that considers human actions as uncaused or spontaneous. However, it only leads to further and greater problems, since this new notion not only is also at odds with the observed reality of human actions, because they are not as spontaneous but rather caused, but even if true, it could still not give us moral responsibility, because spontaneous decisions are not exerted on the basis of some will working under consideration of certain moral values that differentiate the good actions from the bad ones, but on the basis of complete randomness, which is not, by any means, the kind of basis we want to ground our moral evaluations on. Another position to keep in mind would be that of the compatibilist, who accepts that our actions have causes we do not have control over, but still believes in free will, insofar as by it they mean acting according to our beliefs, desires, and values, independently of the fact that they are determined by forces far outside of it. In response, we can say that if free will is redefined in order to fit in with the implications of determinism, it would also be true that we have it. It would in fact be true. Nevertheless, it is not what we mean intuitively when we speak of free will, and it does not make the case of moral responsibility any more appealing, so this new definition just seems arbitrary and ad hoc. Given that our actions are determined by a complex network of causes and effects, the only apparent solution to the free will problem is hard determinism. This proposition accepts the known facts about human behavior and draws from them the conclusion that the human will is evidently determined, and our actions are simply another link in the indefinite deterministic chain of causation. The notion of moral responsibility can therefore be completely rejected, as it would be incoherent to praise or blame an individual for performing an action that they were determined to enforce, in a similar manner as it would seem strange to praise an algorithm for delivering the desired output given certain inputs. This position, referred to as fatalism, considers humans as powerless in their decision-making, thereby immunizing us to the moral responsibility inspired by our actions. The second notion, however, also faces certain problematics, although of a different nature than the voluntarist ones. The concern this time is not with respect to the determinist position on free will, but to the impracticality of the fatalist conclusion on the issue of moral responsibility, especially at a social level. By eliminating, in theory, the possibility of attaching moral responsibility to human actions, the fatalist is setting up the terrain for a world where no justifiable law can be established and no moral improvement can be achieved because we do not have a solid ground on which to blame or praise people for their actions, thereby not allowing us to incentivize what we deem as moral behavior and criminalize immoral behavior. Furthermore, it would hijack our ability to pursue political activism, since if social outcomes are a matter of fate, then why bother fighting for the desired changes at all? It is for that reason that a different solution to the problem of moral responsibility that accepts the known facts about the natural world must be found. First, before getting to the actual issue at stake, it is important to clarify the metaphysical stance on free will of this new notion of moral responsibility. This position, whilst accepting the truth of determinism, does not go so far as to claim that all events in the world are determined with 100% certainty, what would not allow for any chance of things going in a different direction. It rather accepts the advances accomplished in the field of quantum mechanics, which suggest a more indeterministic world where uncertainty prevails, and the manifestation of specific outcomes is explained through probabilistic models. The effects that a theory of outcomes based on probability has on our notion of human agency are almost negligible, because it is still the case that all possible outcomes are determined by different events following given laws, thereby not letting the window open for a libertarian to just jump in and defend the existence of free will. However, it does shed some light into the fact that the likeliness of an outcome occurring is ultimately determined by the circumstances surrounding that event, and different circumstances will lead to different probabilities for the same outcome occurring. With this in mind, we can now see how through our action, it is possible to alter our circumstances in a way that makes the moral outcomes we desire more probable, even if we do not do so freely. It then becomes clear that our practice of praising and blaming people for their actions, not only at the level of ideas, but especially in the material world by encouraging and discouraging specific behaviors accordingly through our own activity, can correct and perfect our behavior relative to our goals at a social and individual level through the changing of the circumstances that surround them. Furthermore, it is also pragmatic insofar as it can make our conceptions of morality and moral goals more sophisticated and accordant with our own well-being. For example, by condemning slavery and fighting its practice, humans managed to exclude it as the prevailing mode of production in the world. Such change of our material circumstances then gave us the opportunity to reconsider our moral values and behave differently. Furthermore, this new notion also reconciles our rejection of free will with our urge to pursue political activism. Following the example given above, it can be argued that political activism under these circumstances, as a way of making slaves conscious of their state of oppression and misery and giving them support in their struggle, creates a set of conditions that makes a revolution much more probable than before, since the outcome of revolution would now more likely outweigh that of passive conformity in the calculating minds of the oppressed class, even as we accept that those calculations are not product of the exertion of some private, unconstrained will. As a criticism, one might posit the claim that our defense of the notion of moral responsibility is too dependent on its pragmatism. It may certainly be true, the critic can say, that our practices of holding people accountable for their actions and act accordingly is efficient in directing human behavior, and that we can change the world to our advantage through it. But that only tells us that it is useful, and it does not really give us a good reason to accept it beyond its mere usefulness. There does not seem to be a strong case to be made in favor of moral responsibility apart from its apparent efficacy in molding our actions and social environment. In response, we can still suggest that even though our argument relies strongly on such practices being useful, it cannot simply be reduced to that alone. In fact, it is because of these practices that we can have this discussion to begin with, due to them being what enables relationships amongst humans in the first place. Human beings, as social animals, have developed through a complex evolutionary process the capacity to form moral judgments and make other people accountable for their actions relative to them in order to establish relationships with each other, survive, secure offspring, and meet our social species needs. Societies without concrete human relations are an absurdity, and without society there is no philosophy, there is no abstract thinking to adhere to or humanity to argue about at all. Humans go about their daily lives making all kinds of inductions and oversimplifications that any professional philosopher will find aberrant. But it is because of them and our great capacity to benefit evolutionarily from them that we have reached the state in history where we are right now. Proper philosophical thinking is that which sticks to reality and does not place itself above the basic conditions of human existence themselves. It would then be wrong to claim that our support lies only on the practicality of moral responsibility, since it is also predicated on the rather deeper truth about our own life being dependent on it. To conclude, it can therefore be said that, although acceptance of the known facts about our universe must lead us to reject free will, a case in favor of humans as morally responsible for their actions that is consistent with determinism can be made, which not only rests on the basis of its efficiency in directing human behavior and changing our circumstances in a manner that benefits us and makes our concrete relationships more sophisticated, but also credits it with being one of the key components of the origination and sustainability of human interrelations. All societies, from their origination until today, have practiced moral praise and condemnation in some form or another. So to think that we could do away with it in the present seems quite incongruous.